Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is the Canadian Rockies, what to know before you go. And it will be presented by our fabulous expedition leader, Lianne Thompson. Lianne, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. I know you've got a lot to share, so I'll turn it right over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sunny. Yeah, it does say two names, so I'm going to introduce Heather anyways because I'm hoping she's still trying to get in. So I'm going to introduce her as well. But yes, I am Lianne, and yes, Sunny's got her presenter mode open now. That's one of our technical difficulties. So I'm going to say click, and that will be her cue to go to the next slide. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. There's Sunny for Heather. So Heather, who is, as Sunny had said, in Italy right now and desperately trying. We've been trying for about 45 minutes to get her into this thing and unsuccessful right now. She has been a guide with NatHab for several years, guides the Cotswolds programs, Iceland, Switzerland, Churchill, Polar Bears, Northern Lights, Canadian Rockies. She lives in Canmore, which is just outside of Banff, so the Canadian Rockies is basically her backyard, and she hangs out there a whole heck of a lot. So I'm really hoping that her face is magically going to appear at some point here, but I'll introduce myself, so you can go next there, Sunny. I'm Lianne, so I'm also a guide for NatHab, and oops, sorry, back one. Yes, so for NatHab, I do guide many of the same seasons, so I work with Heather quite a bit for our Churchill Polar Bears, the Northern Lights also up in Churchill, Iceland, Cotswolds, and the Canadian Rockies. Many of you may be aware that the Canadian Rockies program is one that has not yet run. It's been on the books for a couple of years now, but unfortunately has been canceled the last couple of years due to the pandemic. So I'm super excited to get it started this year. I live in Cranbrook, BC, which is kind of in the southeast corner. I always usually relate it to being above Glacier Mountain National Park in Montana. So I am just outside of the national parks. You can go to the next slide. And this will introduce our national parks. So for our Canadian Rockies trips, we are in several of the national parks. So we will start in Calgary. That's kind of the main hub. That's the airport. So you'll land in there, get a transfer over to Banff. That's where we'll meet our group. We hang out in parts of Banff National Park, Jasper National Park, Yoho National Park, and then we head over further west into the Bugaboo Provincial Park as well. So we do cover quite a bit of ground here throughout our itinerary, and then we will end by going back to Calgary just because it is the main airport in the area. So that's where we'll be focused there. Next slide. So we'll start off in Banff. If you've not been to Banff before, it is a lovely, lovely town. There's only about population of maybe about 9,000 people, but it increases enormously with tourists. It's a very popular town area to go to. Certainly, if you've got time, I'd recommend either before or after the trip to hang out in the town of Banff because there's just so much to do. It is kind of like this quintessential mountain town. Lots of shops, lots of restaurants. There's a gondola. There's a whole bunch of things to do around there. So have a peek at the itinerary so that you don't do a bunch of things before the itinerary starts that we'll end up doing on the trip, so maybe time afterwards. But Banff, the town itself, is amazing. We'll meet our group here. We'll have a welcome dinner. We'll get to know our group. You'll meet your expedition leader. I'm one of them, and so you might get to meet me, and we'll just kind of talk about some of the logistics of the trip and get you kind of super pumped and amped and excited about it. And if you go to the next slide, it will just show you quickly where we're staying for our first night when we are in Banff, which is the Moose Hotel and Suites. So a lot of our hotels, they do look like this. They've kind of, again, this quintessential mountain vibe in it, but glorious, glorious views. So that's where we will start our day. Next slide. And one of the other things that I just wanted to talk about before we dive into some of the areas that we're going to be is the ecoregions of the Canadian Rockies. So, you know, you can kind of talk about all of these different little mini ecosystems that exist. A lot of times people just talk about it, you know, over the ground. As you drive further away, you go from a desert ecosystem to a mountain ecosystem, or, you know, up in Churchill, we go from tundra to the boreal forest. In the Rockies, we talk a lot about it in an elevational standpoint. So typically we we will discuss things being in the montane region, the subalpine, or the alpine region. And so each of these areas is quite different. They get different amount of precipitation, sunlight, their soil, pH is different, you know, just depending on, it also depends on things like the slope that it is. But essentially each of these regions is different, and we'll spend time in the different regions, and it offers us the opportunity to see different wildlife, different plants, trees, animals that live in the various ecoregions. So montane, subalpine, and alpine is some terminology that you'll hear quite a bit throughout our trip, because that's where we're going to be heading on through. Next slide. As you saw on the map, we do cover quite a bit of ground on our trip, and so certainly for the first portion, we are doing the bulk of that on our driving, so exploring iconic and dramatic sites of the Canadian Rockies. We will see a lot of other people here as well. You know, the Canadian Rockies are famous, they're famous for a reason, and there's a lot of points along our on our itinerary that we will be running into a lot of people, because you've heard of them and so have thousands of other people. So yes, we will be running into other people. We'll see a lot of other people as well, but it's incredibly worth it. These places are famous for a reason, and we will do our best to try and avoid some of the crowds, which does include some things like getting up really early in the morning, using our local knowledge as well to find best photo angles and the quietest experiences possible. We've partnered with Discover Banff Tours. So in the picture here, you can kind of see one of the buses that we would be using for the first several days of our itinerary when we are in the national parks. Gives us the best flexibility for seeing the sites and getting around. And if you've traveled with NatHab before, you will probably be aware of the fact that we do offer ample space. So we always have more seats than we do have people. So everyone does get a window seat. There's lots of room for all of our gear and stuff as well. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about some of the places that we're going to go to, places that we'll see, as well as some of the animals that we hope to find. So first off, we'll start with Johnson Canyon, kind of just outside of Banff itself. So it's a limestone canyon. It has this boardwalk that you can see. And here we kind of talk about the erosion. It tells an erosion story since the last glaciation. So the ongoing canyon formation and examples of glacially influenced landscape. It's one of the reasons why the Canadian Mountain National Parks are designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So Johnson Canyon is very popular. It's a very beautiful spot, and it provides opportunities to see the power of water up close and talk about the geological history of the mountains. So lots of beautiful landscape to see here. This, you know, crystal clear blue waters as well is certainly another feature that we will see as well. Next slide. We will also be spending some time on the Bow Valley Parkway Drive. So this is, you know, Bow Valley Parkway, again, is something that you can probably see in a very quick Google search. And it is a very scenic route throughout kind of Banff National Park, chock full of mountain and river vistas. And it's a great chance to also spot wildlife there. The Bow Valley Parkway is actually where the most wildlife sightings tend to happen along the Canadian Rockies. We'll also see lots of wildflowers too, because we're low down in that montane ecoregion. Strawberries flowering, paintbrush fireweed, a whole bunch of different flowers and stuff that are around there. And it's also very close to the historic Canadian Pacific Railway. So we'll end up talking about trade and transport, how it occurs today, as well as the history of that throughout the history of the Canadian Rocky Mountains, and is arguably the reason why tourism began in the Rockies in the first place. So when we are driving along here as well, there is, as I said, an ample amount of time to see wildlife. We will do our best to try and stop. You know, if we do see a bear along the side of the road, we will be trying to stop and make sure that we get the opportunity to enjoy that, but also bear in mind that there will be times that stopping is just kind of not really an option for us because we can't cause traffic jams. Bear jams is a term that is used in these areas for a reason. There are even areas in the national parks where you are not allowed to stop no matter what. just because there's a lot of curvy, windy roads and all of that kind of stuff that happens along our drive. So if we can stop, and we can stop safely with respect to the animals, as well as making sure that we're safe for us and the other drivers, then we will certainly be trying our best to make that happen. But sometimes when we see wildlife, it will just kind of be a drive-by, just because it's not safe for us to stop. So in those moments, we'll be just kind of enjoying the moment as it happens, and not as much on the photography kind of aspect of it. Next slide. So then we do get to Lake Louise as well. Famous Lake Louise. No trip to the Canadian Rockies is really complete without standing on the incredible lakeshore, listening to all the different languages, sharing in the international feel of the joy of the vista that the vista brings. So people from literally all over the world come. They do crowd around this lake because it is an extremely famous lake. The lakeshore itself is a busy spot, so it does also offer some spectacular people spotting opportunities, which can always be fun. But it is easy to escape some of the crowds by taking the walk, and that's one of the things that we will be doing on our trip. A lot of people come up to Lake Louise, they come along the lakeshore, they snap the picture, and away they go. But we want to make sure that we're taking time to enjoy being around the lake and kind of seeing it from different angles. So there's options here ranging from strolling at lake level trail, as far as you kind of want to keep going. On the right hand side, you can follow along all the way along those trees, and there's a path that goes all the way to the back, so we can kind of meander some of that ways. The expedition leaders will also lead some kind of longer guided hikes. Historically, this could be considered the birthplace of guided tourism in the Canadian Rockies. In 1882, Tom Wilson became the first white man to lay eyes on the lake, known to Indigenous people as the Lake of the Little Fishes. Wilson named it Emerald Lake, but after the arrival of the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1884, it was renamed Lake Louise after Prince Louise, Alberta, the fourth daughter of Queen Victoria. Then in 1896, the area catapulted to international fame as Mount Lefroy, which is visible in the back left of this photo, was the site of the first mountaineering fatality in the Canadian Rockies. So, you know, all of these mountains, all of the snow, there's tons of people who are wanting to get to the top of them and explore that, but there wasn't a whole lot of experience in the area. So yes, there was lots of mountaineering that was attracting tourists, and Philip Stanley Abbott was one of them, and unfortunately he had died doing that mountaineering. After his death, there was efforts to ban mountain climbing in the Canadian Rockies, but thankfully this did not happen, and it's now enabled us to have the tourism that we have. And instead, Swiss guides were actually invited to come to Canada and take clients safely up the peaks. This obviously was extremely successful, and the Swiss guides became a part of the historical tapestry of Lake Louise. And the presence eventually led to the formation of the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides, one of the certifications that we'll end up getting, which is still very much in operation today. So like all of the heli-hiking guides that we meet in the Bugaboo Lodge, which is later on in the trip, they're all certified through this process. Yeah, rich history here, lots to explore. There's also the Chateau Lake Louise. So there's just tons and tons of beauty that is around here. If you can click to the next slide, a little icon is just going to flip on here. Perfect. Altitude. Oh, sorry. Go back one. Did want to, so this one, altitude sickness, might be something that people will be thinking about as they come here, depending on where you live, what your elevation is going to be prior to being here. That you might notice it at Lake Louise. Will be at an elevation of about 6,000 feet, which is high enough to feel shortness of breath for some people. We're not high enough for the serious effects of altitude sickness, but we'll be reminding you regularly to drink plenty of water, rest often, and allowing your body to acclimate to the higher elevations that we'll be experiencing. So yes, we will we'll talk about that and kind of be reminding you of some of those safety things along the way. Next slide. So some of the wildlife that we can see around the area, of course, we've got these beautiful mountain vistas, but we'll be looking for several different animals as well. We can start off with some infamous birds. So the Clark's nutcracker here, it is actually a corvid, so it's related to things like crows, ravens, magpies, jays, all of that kind of stuff. I'm a corvid nut. I totally admit to that. I think they're really fascinating birds, incredibly smart, and that's true with the Clark's nutcracker as well. One of the things that they're really famous for is food caching. So they are year-round residents. They tend to live higher up in the alpine areas, and they go around and they collect food in the summer, store it all winter. They hide thousands. They estimate that they're hiding around over 30,000 pieces of food in each fall so that they've got food available for them throughout the winter time. But one of the things that makes the Clark's nutcracker so special in the area is its relationship with the white bark pine. So they do eat the seed. So they'll they'll go collect these seeds and they go and spread them out for them to go and eat later. But while they do have an incredible memory, they don't remember where all of the food caches are. So it means that they're also helping with seed dispersal, which enables these white bark pine trees to really flourish in the area, and they provide homes for hundreds of other species as well. Next slide. We have the osprey, which is another bird that is often seen around here. It is a bird of prey. And so these guys we often do see more so along, bodies of water. They are a fishing bird. So they actually have barbs along their feet, as well as they adjust their talons. So they've got two pointing inwards, or two frontwards, two backwards, and all of this enables them to really grip onto those slippery fish. So it's really cool when you get to see them fish. You can just watch them flying up above, and then they dive bomb right into the water, and they'll oftentimes come out with these really heavy, incredible fish. So really wicked bird to see out there too. Next, we'll go back down a little smaller. So we've got the American dipper. We'll see a lot of these things, especially along like kind of moving streams. These guys are typically known as like a white water specialist. So they are a water bird. They're feeding on aquatic insects and fish eggs that are all along in these stream beds. And in case you're unaware, a lot of the water, all this water, it's being fed from glaciers. So it's very, very cold water. And so these guys are specially adapted to be able to thrive in these areas. They have like a counter current heat exchange in their legs, so that it's making sure that they're not losing a whole bunch of heat when they're cold. Their legs are standing in this very cold water. They also have nasal flaps that seal their nostrils in, so it enables them to kind of dip in. So they are dipping in constantly, which is why they're called the American dipper as they go search for food. Next slide. We also sometimes get the chance to see some turkey vultures. I tend to see them a little bit more along the highways, especially as we head over to the Bugaboo area too. Vultures, they may get a bad rap, but they're such incredible birds. They are a scavenger, of course, and so these guys are well known for just eating dead things along the side of the road, which sounds gross, but they are very important for our ecosystems. The acidity of their stomach is so strong that they're able to eat dead things that maybe are full of bacteria, even are carrying diseases, that if other animals were to eat that, it would make them incredibly ill. And instead, these guys eat it, and the acidity of their stomach is so strong that it helps clean it. So they essentially are acting like janitors for our ecosystem. So incredibly important birds. They're also really beautiful, and I hope you think so too. Next slide. Lake Louise Inn. Okay, so after we've kind of explored around Lake Louise, we do check into our hotel as well. So Lake Louise Inn, another kind of very classic mountain looking cabin area. So we'll be going in, we check into these hotels. It's a bit more rustic, but of course the room's clean, dry, warm, and we'll get a great night's sleep while we're there. And being in Lake Louise, it's kind of right in Lake Louise town, so it enables us to be quite close to many of these iconic locations, because the earlier you can get to things, the better off you are. Next slide. Moraine Lake being one of them. It's a very famous lake. Many people are coming to the Rockies to see it. If you Google Canadian Rockies and you look at photos, this is often one of the photos that you will see is of Moraine Lake. It was actually on the Canadian $20 bill for many, many years. So it's the $20 view, people will call it. Valley of the 10 Peaks as well, all of these different mountains. And it was named because of glacier interactions again. So if you've got this glacier that's forming over a landscape, and as they're moving, you know, this big giant ice sheet, it's pushing a whole bunch of debris on the bottom of it, and that debris all ends up collecting, and eventually a glacier reaches its terminus, however long it's going to be, and as it retreats back, it's now leaving a whole bunch of debris that's accumulated there. So that accumulation of debris is called a moraine, and so this is Moraine Lake. It is, again, a very, very, very popular spot, and unlike many of the other locations, it has an incredibly small parking lot, which is amazing because it really does help to control the flow of people coming in and out. Of course, you can get on buses to go up and see that as well, but it's important that we're getting there very early. So on our itinerary, we do plan to do an early morning sunrise at Lake Louise, which can be very early depending on the time of year in which, or what trip you've got booked, then it really does impact on that as well. So yeah, we will be going very early. It is, of course, optional if you decide that you want to sleep through it. That's by all means, you can do that. But we'll be going here before breakfast to go and try and catch the sunrise because it's quite a spectacular sight to see. Many other people will be there enjoying it as well. There are some hiking trails around the area too. And again, we'll be kind of working to find ones that are suitable for our trips, because some of them are like full long day 9-hour excursions with massive elevation gain, all of that kind of stuff. So we won't be doing all of those. So we'll be kind of adjusting and finding our hiking routes as we can do them. All right, next slide. We'll also be driving on the Icefields Parkway, another iconic thing that people come and want to experience when they are in the Rocky Mountain National Parks. So more glaciers visible from this road than any other road in the world. So it's an incredible experience. There's also sweeping glacier valleys and some of the most impressive vistas that you can kind of see anywhere. We'll spend the entire itinerary making stops along the road, but we've picked out some of our favorites. Again, this drive is another opportunity for looking for some iconic Canadian Rockies species, the grizzly bear, black bear, elk, a whole bunch of different animals. And again, we'll stop when we can because sometimes these guys are browsing on the diversity of vegetation in the area along the highway passes through. So next slide. There's several areas that we will stop along the Icefield Parkway. Peyto Lake is one of them. It is very classic, another iconic one. Turquoise waters that are fed by a glacier, which is no longer visible, but still provides the still required for the dramatic color of the water. So this one is named after Bill Peyto, who was an outfitter and horse wrangler in the early 1900s. He was quite the character, full of a lot of antics. One of his most famous one is actually when he released a live lynx into a bar because he wanted to clear it out so that he could drink in peace and quiet. So there's many stories about him on our journey that we'll discuss. So he traveled the length of the Canadian Rockies on horseback and found Peyto Lake to be one of the most beautiful places to soak up peace and tranquility. So it was named after him. Climate change, we will discuss throughout our time here. It's inevitable. You can't talk about all these glacier-fed lakes and glaciation and all that kind of stuff without talking about climate change. So time is of the essence, essentially, when we're coming to enjoying Peyto Lake. The glacier which feeds it has been given the prognosis of less than 10 years before it ceases to exist due to our warming climate. The disappearance of glaciers, such as Peyto, will have a huge range of effects on human activities in the Rockies and all the way across Canada and parts of the northern US, as rivers that are fed by these glaciers year-round will enter a period of much more seasonal runoff. This will impact communities, agriculture, climate from far and wide, but also means that over the next couple of years, the gems of the Canadian Rockies like this will change in character. So unfortunately, it is kind of a classic case of wanting to see it before it's too late. But yeah, we'll go in and enjoy the beauty of Peyto Lake. So next slide as well. Bow Lake, another sparkling blue lake that invites us to walk on a short distance along the shore and talk about the history here. So Bow Lake is the headwater for the Bow River. This is the river that we will already be familiar with and actually flows east via the Saskatchewan River system through Lake Winnipeg and all the way up to Hudson Bay. So something that we end up talking about when we're up in Churchill, because waters that are coming from this area are all headed, they're heading up to Hudson Bay. So there's a lovely lodge here. We can get a coffee along the shores of Bow Lake. The lodge was built by a local outfitter by the name of Jimmy Simpson, another kind of classic figure in the Canadian Rockies. He was originally born in the UK, immigrated to Canada, was originally from Winnipeg in the early 1900s at the young age of only 17. His family had furnished him he was a middle son with enough money to buy a modest farm on the prairies and make his life there. But he had other plans. He did not want to do that, so he ended up squandering his money on Main Street by the station in Winnipeg, traded his father's gold watch for a train ticket to Calgary, hoping to remake his fortune working on the railway there. Unfortunately, the work on the lines had stopped by the time he made it, and so he hopped on the train to get to Golden before getting caught for his lack of ticket. He only made it to a spot about 20 minutes east of Lake Louise village before being tossed from the train. Imagine how he would have felt walking through the Canadian wilderness with absolutely nothing. So on arrival to Lake Louise, he fell in with the outfitter Tom Wilson, who I mentioned in the Lake Louise history, who recognized a spark and determination in Jimmy. And despite his city slicker past and total lack of knowledge of horses and outfitting, Tom trained Jimmy. So before long, he was considered one of the best in the industry and leading expeditions up this remote valley where he'd laid eyes on Bow Lake and declared it the most beautiful thing that he'd ever seen. 20 years later, he'd accumulated enough cash to build the lodge, and he raised his family here on the shores of Bow Lake, and he is remembered fondly by the guiding community as he was an active member of this until his death in 1972. So Bow Lake, lots of history. The lodge there really provides us a backdrop for that as well, and it's one of the most idyllic spots. Okay, next slide. So here we are at Athabasca Glacier. So we've continued farther north and described by those who work here as a friendly glacier. This tongue drips from the vast Columbia ice fields above. Despite advancing under the weight of the gravity by about 100 feet a year, it is still nonetheless experiencing a net loss of about 16 feet per year. This retreat has taken it from the far side of the valley, so behind the photographer of this picture all the way to where we will see it. There is, so as you walk through, they actually have all these landmarks of where the glacier has been historically over time and how far it's retreated. So the glacier remains an imposing and dramatically beautiful sight, and it can also be quite chilly here because of the katabatic winds that are blowing down from the ice feet above. So we always recommend having a nice jacket here and warmer layers because the wind just sweeps right over that ice field, right over the glacier, and kind of comes and hits us. So it can be a little bit chilly as well. So we'll have a chance to get up close and personal with the glacier, and it's not an experience available everywhere, so it's a really incredible opportunity to learn about the glacier. Next slide. Another one of the lodges that we will be staying in is the Truffle Pigs Lodge, which Heather, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like she's going to be joining us. When we talked about it, she just goes, "The food is amazing." So apparently it's a very fantastic place and she would recommend it to everyone. So I'm excited to get out there. The owners care enormously, and we hopefully will get to meet them while we're staying at the restaurant. So this one is in the small community of Field, BC, which actually has less than 100 full-time residents, and has only had cell service and Wi-Fi since 2015. So So it's certainly been a place where people can kind of go and get away from things. So at this point, we're going to be in Yoho National Park, but so it's often the lesser known sister of Banff and Jasper. So Banff and Jasper are both in the province of Alberta. Yoho is like a counterpart, but it is in the province of British Columbia. Yoho is the Cree word for an expression of shock and awe, and so it certainly does live up to its name. So we'll go next slide. I mentioned food from Truffle Pig being amazing, but also just in terms of talking about food in general on the trip as well. We will be eating at several restaurants along the way, but sometimes we will be eating kind of more packed lunches, picnic lunches, and that sort of stuff, just so that we can really capitalize on our time in the Rockies as well. So we'll have a whole kind of variety of different food options, but if you've come on a Nat Hab trip before, you know that you will not go hungry. We are constantly feeding you. Yeah, lots and lots to eat here. Next slide. Here we have arrived at Emerald Lake. So it is another gem that is in the Canadian Rockies, and it is a bit, because it's in Yoho and it's less popular than Banff and Jasper, it's a bit easier to leave the crowds behind. So there's nice walks along the lakeshore. So it's a really great opportunity to get away from people and kind of have the ability to feel a bit more alone and see this changing ecosystem. The other thing, I talked about rivers flowing up into Hudson Bay as well, and at this point we've now crossed onto the other side of the Continental Divide. So the Continental Divide runs largely, or at least for a portion, it runs divide between the province of Alberta and the province of BC, meaning that on the Alberta side of the divide, the rivers are flowing east, and on the west side of the divide, the rivers are flowing western. So we've crossed the Continental Divide and now on the wetter western slopes of the Rockies, and around the shady shale of the lakeshore at Emerald Lake, we'll have the opportunity to step into a damp, rich forest ecosystem reminiscent of a coastal rainforest. So there's lots of hemlock, cedar, Douglas fir, a whole bunch of thick mosses, all of that kind of stuff. So it's really cool because we've now transformed into a totally different ecosystem from the dry eastern slopes that we've seen before. So there is also, if you've kind of looked up in this area, one of the other places is the Emerald Lake is close to the Burgess Shale, which is the fossil record, which has become internationally important. And we'll click to that on the next slide. So perfect, we're there. The Burgess Shale, discovered by Charles Walcott and his wife in 1909. The Burgess Shale is a layer of shale rock that contained perfectly preserved skeletons from 508 million years ago. The remarkable thing is that a mudslide which formed the shale later also preserved soft tissues of the organisms present at that time. So 508 million years ago, we were in the time period known as the Cambrian, and at this particular stage of geological history, life was undergoing a period of evolutionary experimentation. So there was a great explosion of different creatures, some with body plans no longer seen on our planet today, that were populating our oceans. Predator-prey relationships were triggering rapid and explosive evolution, and from this, geologists were able to extrapolate all kinds of new information about the beginnings of life on our planet. So certainly a very iconic, historic, geological, so much importance that was kind of discovered with this Burgess Shale, and we can't access the shale beds specifically, as it's a full day hike about 17 miles from the lake, but there are some great exhibits on the lake shore and the visitor center and field that can give us the opportunity to have a look at the geology here. Next slide. So we are also still in Yoho here, and we will be taking a look at this one's always a struggle for me to say. We always just end up adding a whole bunch more letters to it. The Takawawa Falls, second tallest falls in Canada, and it's a lovely short hike from the parking lot. And as we get closer to the falls, we also get a chance to get misted by the glacial haze. So again, here we're in Yoho, and there's some short little walking trails. This one is another quite popular place, so people will come and see, but there are some walking trails around this region as well. So we will get a chance to enjoy this falls before we, next slide, head further west. And then at this point is kind of our opportunity to kind of get more away from the crowds. So whenever we plan, you plan a trip to the Canadian Rocky Mountain National Parks, you have those iconic features that you're going to go to: Peyto Lake, Lake Louise, Moraine Lake, Johnson Canyon, all of these things that are absolute must-sees, and we can't escape that. We want to take you there and see these amazing places. They're amazing and incredible for a reason. But with Nat Hab trips, we do try and get away from people a little bit more. We want to kind of give us a bit more of a quiet experience. And so for the last several days of our itinerary, we do head into this Bugaboo Lodge. And so that kind of really helps provide that opportunity for us. So the lodge itself is within Bugaboo Provincial Park. And the only way to access this lodge is by helicopter. So we'll take a drive over, hop in some helicopters, and get helicoptered up to this lodge. There is 32 guest rooms, and you may note that there are not that many people that come on our trip. So it does mean we are sharing the lodge with other guests. We do not have it rented out exclusively for our trips. So we'll be sharing it with other guests as well, but we'll still be hanging out as a group for kind of a lot of our time up here. So dinners, all of our meals and everything that we're eating at the lodge, we will be eating as a group together. There's also a whole bunch of things to do at the lodge itself. They do have, a hot tub. You can see a rooftop hot tub there, saunas, restaurant, bar. They have an indoor climbing wall as well. So there's lots to do at the lodge itself. It's a wonderful, peaceful place. There is no cell service up there. They do have Wi-Fi, but no cell service. So again, kind of gives us the opportunity to get away from people and really submerge ourselves in this really seclusive area. And there's also a variety of hiking opportunities, next slide, that we will be exploring, and we call that heli-hiking. And I am just so excited to get out here and do this with you guys. It's going to be incredible. Heli-hiking, since we're already up in this lodge, it means that we've gotten rid of having to do the bulk of the climbing to get up into some of these amazing alpine areas. And so each day, we will be setting off on jaunts to do heli-hiking. And so again, there will be other guests at the lodge, and we have guides that are at these lodges as well that are an incredible wealth of knowledge, and they've got an amazing system already in place. And so they kind of cater to a whole variety of different abilities for people and their hiking. So what they do, they'll kind of have all these different categories of, some people want to come and they want to go through more of like a saunter through the mountains and stop a lot and smell the flowers and enjoy taking in the vistas. They don't want to do a whole lot of elevation change, don't really want to cover a whole lot of ground, and instead just kind of really want to take some peace and quiet and enjoy being in the mountains. So we have that scale of things, all the way up to the people who are, wanting to spend a lot of time hiking, get really active, cover a lot of ground, do some elevation changes, all of that kind of stuff. So from one extreme to the other, and you can kind of sign up and figure out what your category is, and you can change it throughout our time there. We do have 3 days of heli-hiking, or 2.5 days of heli-hiking here. And so if one day you're wanting to be a little bit more of the saunter, but then the next day maybe you're like, well, I kind of want to step it up and see a little bit more, cover a bit more, and experience some more rough terrain, you can kind of decide what group you want to go in, and we go off on these heli-hiking experiences. So there is a variety offered for a whole bunch of different hiking opportunities. Of course, we do need you to like having stability and confidence in your hiking capabilities is how you're going to be able to enjoy this entire itinerary to its maximum potential. But we do have trained guides that will be there with us, and it's an opportunity to see a different type of ecosystem as well, because we've gone up a lot higher up. So the heli hiking, they can be half day, they can be full day. And so again, it's one of those things that it's really catered towards what people are wanting to do. It's your vacation after all, and we want you to explore and enjoy it in whatever capacity that means for you. So if you want to be out the full day doing as much hiking as you can do that. If you are, I want to go hiking in the morning and hang out in the hot tub in the afternoon, then those opportunities are available for you too. Put a little caveat in the corner there, wilderness toilet. Several of our spots, and especially when we're in the Bugaboos, it's the idea of a wilderness toilet, meaning that there are not outhouses and all of this kind of stuff all over the place, as you can imagine, in these high alpine mountains. And so, yeah, a lot of times when we're going to be needing to use the bathroom, you do so in nature. So we'll find spots where people can go, they get away from the group, go behind, you know, rocks or trees or something, and you'll squat, and that's the toilet that we're using. So start getting yourself prepped for that as well, because it is important to be staying hydrated, staying well fed, and all of that kind of stuff while we're on this trip. I do not recommend dehydrating yourself so that you don't have to pee out in the wilderness. That's not how you'll stay well during this trip. So embrace the wilderness toilet, and you get some pretty incredible views while you're using it too, so it's quite fun. So yes, I mentioned that we're going to be up kind of more in that alpine, so that top region. So we'll change some of the animals that we will be seeing along our journey here that we're going to attempt to see. So next slide. One that I very often see when I'm hiking up in the alpine is the hoary marmot. So it is, as I said, kind of found at these higher elevations in that high alpine. One of the largest rodents. They do hibernate in winter. They'll live in big groups, and they're also nicknamed the whistler. So hearing them is often what we'll do before we will be seeing them, because they do whistle. It's how they're communicating with others in their family, in their colony. So it's, you know, they're communicating whenever there's risks and stuff around. But they do live up here, and it's really fun if we get a chance to see them just kind of walking along. They're quite large. You can see some pretty big ones, and so just getting a chance to watch them and them talking to each other and moving about and doing their thing. It's a really fun experience to see these marmots up in the mountains. Next slide. We have mountain goats. I will tell you right now that they are seldom seen. It's not like we're going around and seeing mountain goats everywhere we've been. I spent a lot of time hiking in the mountains, and I haven't seen that many mountain goats, but the higher, you know, being up in these more secluded areas, it does increase our chances of seeing them. They actually have like reasonable population numbers in the mountain national parks as well, but they're very elusive, and so we don't see them very often. But they are the largest mammal that is up that high in elevation, and so these guys are kind of like nature's rock climbers. So they've got toes that are spread out and allow them to grab on rocky features. They have excellent balance, and so the only times I have seen them, even when I am up really high, they're up even higher, and they're walking along these like really precarious ledges, and somehow they're able to do that. It's quite remarkable. Next, we'll go back down inside. So we'll talk about the pika, also nicknamed the rock rabbit. So it's the smallest member of the rabbit family. We do also find them up at high elevations. Another one that we'll hear oftentimes before we see them. They do like an eep noise. It's really fun. I hear them almost every time I'm doing a hike up farther up in the alpine areas. They are quite plentiful, but they're very small as well. So for wildlife watchers, when we're doing these hikes, it's a great excuse to catch your breath as well, but we often will stop and you just look, because they do blend in very well. Same with the hoary marmots. All of these animals, they're specialized to blend in well with the environment, and so we end up just stopping and we watch, because our best chances of seeing them is movement. You're looking for movement along the landscape, and so that's when I'll often see them. They're on all these different rock slides, and surprisingly enough, this animal is not one, despite the fact how small they are. They actually don't hibernate. They do stay up. They're up moving around all winter long, and instead they make these little hay piles under large rocks, and they feed on that throughout the winter. So they're active all winter long, which does mean throughout the summer they're quite busy, so we can see a lot of movement. And so they estimate that each pika will make over 14,000 trips to nearby meadows to go be collecting plants and gathering stuff to make their hay piles so that they can sustain themselves throughout the winter. So really impressive creature. I love seeing pika. They're super fun and very adorable. Next slide. Of course, bears. We'll talk about bears. So black bears and grizzly bears, both seen. I've seen both of them in the national parks. I've hiked in the Bugaboo areas and in other mountain ranges as well. And so seeing bears is certainly something we know people will come for. Obviously, when we're on a hike, it's very different than when we are driving along in a vehicle. So bear safety is something that we'll talk about immensely throughout our time here. The guides, we do carry bear spray, and we've all spent a lot of time around bears and can understand bear behavior. So please do listen to your guides because they're the ones that will be keeping you safe while we're out on these adventures. But both black bears and grizzly bears are seen there. They can sometimes be a bit tricky to tell apart because black bears are not always black and grizzly bears are not always brown. Grizzly bear, brown bear, same name or same species. So they can be a variety of different colors, and so we'll look for other things on there. Most notably is the hump that the grizzly bear has. This picture is not great for you to be able to see it, but grizzly bears are kind of like backhoes in that they're constantly digging. They've got really long claws. It's one of the ways that we can differentiate a black bear paw print versus a grizzly bear paw print is the prominence of those claws. Grizzly bears are constantly digging in the ground, so they end up with this large muscular hump along their back, and so that's one of the key features that we'll be using to ID if we're seeing a grizzly versus a black bear. Their faces are also different. Grizzlies have a concave or kind of dished profile face, smaller ears, much larger claws, as I said, than black bears, and black bears have a much flatter Roman nose profile is what they call it, and larger ears. So yeah, we'll be trying our best to see them, but yeah, please be cognizant of bear safety. If we do see ones, we're watching bear behavior. They'll often see us before we see them, but we're very much aware. We also do things like make a lot of noise when we're on trail. You know, we're constantly talking. It's pretty easy when we're in groups because we're always chatting, but as a person who hikes out in the mountains, I do need to make sure that I'm constantly making noise because we want to make sure that those bears know us, know that we are there. A surprised bear that's when we encounter that danger. So we'll be talking a lot, as I said, carrying bear spray, and then if we do see ones, you know, looking at what their behavior is, backing away, but we're not like booking it out of there because we're just encouraging them to chase us. So we will discuss bear safety at length and make sure that we stay nice and safe in the parks there. But next slide, now that we've seen all of these amazing places and amazing animals, you might be wondering about your photography gear. What types of gear should you be bringing on your trip? Cell phones are obviously a wonderful tool for photography, and they are getting better and better and better and better. So if you're not really a photographer, but you have a cell phone, your guide can help you kind of capitalize on your cell phone usage and try and make it so you get the best pictures out of there. And then we will all be carrying, all of us are photographers in some capacity, so we'll have photo gear in some regard. So, you know, DSLR cameras. I do tend to travel with 2 lenses with me when I go out. So I have a 100 to 400 telephoto lens, and that's the lens that I will be using for my wildlife photography opportunities. You know, trying to capture those pika or the bears or whatever it is that we're seeing. Having a telephoto lens is really helpful because there will be a distance between us. We are making sure that we are respecting our wildlife and we're not getting too close to them. It's It's not safe for us. It's also not safe for them. So having a telephoto lens is important. And then I also carry just kind of a wider angle lens as well that I use kind of more for landscape. I'm not going to lie, as cell phones get bigger, I carry around my wide angle lens a lot less and less because I find my cell phone can do a really great job of taking photos. If you're not that into photography, then not to worry, guides, we take loads of pictures and we share them with you as well. I do recommend bringing binoculars as well. They're really good for seeing some of these smaller creatures, birds as well as mammals, so having binoculars with you is helpful. And in terms of a tripod, I don't really recommend bringing a tripod. If you've got a small compact one that you are familiar with using, then certainly it's something that you can be bringing with you. But they often are just kind of a lot of bulk and a lot of weight, and it makes it kind of more difficult for you to do. And we're not doing things like waterfall photography where you need to have that stability. So I personally don't carry around a tripod. If you need a tripod for some purpose, oftentimes we can just kind of makeshift a tripod. I will put them on rocks and stuff like that if I'm needing that level of stability. So tripod, not super recommended. There is also just limits on, you know, our pack size and whatnot when we're in the helicopters as well. You can't be bringing an enormous backpack full of a whole bunch of gear because we're sharing that helicopter space with others too. So those are my photo recommendations, and we'll go next slide. And also just talk about packing in general, temperatures. It can get very, very warm. I know that these, you know, 73 might not look like it's that hot here, but the sun is really incredibly hot in the mountains. So it can get very hot. Sun is a big deal. So sunscreen for sure. We're at these higher elevations, you can get burned much faster. So sunscreen, hat, all of those types of things are incredibly important. But mountain weather can also get quite cool. It's one of my favorite things about the mountains. I live in them, and when it's really hot days, even at night, the temperatures do drop quite a bit. So it's a lot cooler. I don't have air conditioning at home, and so I appreciate having those cooler nights. So because we have some early morning starts as well, it's a good idea to have layers and bringing layers on hikes, because we can experience snow every single month of the year, especially when we're up in these higher alpine regions. Lots of snow around. I've sat on my butt and snowed down a mountain in the middle of July. So snow is up there. So even when we go out on hikes, I always have some extra layers and stuff as well, just so that as things change, wind as well, as we get higher up too, sometimes the wind gets really, really fast and very cold. So having a good waterproof and windproof jacket as well as layers will be really important. Hiking shoes are an absolute must. I do not recommend coming in sandals. I do not recommend coming in runners. You want to have a good pair of waterproof hiking shoes that offer a lot of ankle support as well, because we are going over some rougher terrain. It's very rocky, so we're not on just stable flats. We will be kind of walking on different levels of terrain. So having really good hikers is important. I would also recommend getting them in advance, walking around in them. Please do not have your first hike with us be the first time you've got those shoes on your feet, because that's how blisters happen and your feet will get sore. So getting your hikers in advance and kind of just walking around with them, even just doing it at home if they're brand new, they're nice and clean, and getting your feet a little bit more comfortable and used to that in there. But hiking shoes are an absolute must. Trekking poles, you know, I also would recommend for increasing your stability and comfort in this mountain terrain too. You can get some pretty lightweight ones that do compact down, then they extend up. And we can go through trekking pole usage and how to best capitalize on them to help you and assist you out on our hikes as well. So trekking poles are pretty good. The other thing to consider too is, you may have noticed that we're staying at several different lodges. So I do recommend being really cognizant of your luggage too. You don't want to be overpacking, because you're going to be packing and repacking several times throughout our trip. And the more luggage you bring, the more annoying that's going to be, and the harder it's going to be just to kind of move throughout. throughout the different lodges. So being really aware of that. It's okay if we see the same outfit more than once. You'll see us wearing the same outfits more than once as well. So packing light will be beneficial, but making sure that you do have enough layers. So even just having a really good long sleeve to have underneath, having a sweater, having your waterproof, windproof jacket, all of those things, having a toque or a hat, those things are going to be important. Again, you might think you're going in the middle of January, so you won't need a toque, but or a winter hat. Canadians, we call them toques. Yeah, you will still need them. So make sure you're bringing that. Gloves as well, good for hand protection, especially if you're using your trekking poles. Your hands are out, so if you've got mitts, gloves, that kind of thing. They don't need to be extensive, but just a good cover. It helps to keep your hands warmer. So yeah, layers are always a good suggestion. Waterproof stuff is the same as well. So we don't always experience a ton of rain in the summer, but you never know. Mountain weather can change very, very rapidly, and so we always will recommend bringing a variety of different clothes with you. Next slide. That is the end. We've done it. Unfortunately, Heather did not manage to make it through here, so I'm shared her stuff as well, some of her stories too. I'm sure you guys will get a chance to meet her at some point as well. But yeah, that's kind of a quick wrap up. I am so excited to get these trips underway. They've been on my itinerary for a couple of years now, and I've been talking with NatHab for them for even longer. So I love the mountains. I live in the mountains. It's just a spectacular place to be, and I can't wait to share it with all of you guys. It's going to be so fun.
Thank you so much, Lianne. We're over time, so I just want to do some rapid fire questions, if we can, real quick ones. Are there ever bald eagles? Do you ever see bald eagles?
Yeah, we do see eagles. There's eagles and stuff around too.
Awesome. What is the physical, you mentioned there's some varieties and options and so forth, but as far as what is the physical rating for this trip?
So we will do, so I think it's 3 miles is kind of our, like being able to walk 3 miles on rough terrain during one single hike is kind of a requirement. And when I say rough terrain, it's not like we're bouldering and going over things. It's just that it's not flat level ground. There's a lot of rocks and stuff all over here. And there is elevational changes as well, but each of our hikes, some of them are shorter, but they can be up to 3 miles. And we can sometimes do a hike in the morning that's 3 miles and another one in the afternoon that's 3 miles. But we will provide breaks and all of that kind of stuff throughout as well. And it's not like we're trudging through on 3 miles, going through really fast. We will take breaks on there as well. But yeah, you do need to be able to kind of walk at least 3 miles on this different types of terrain, which is why the trekking poles and hiking shoes are a necessity for it.
Excellent. Can you use a walker or a wheelchair on this trip?
No.
Okay.
Definitely not a wheelchair. If you're in a walker, it will be very challenging for you to do the hiking trails. So, because some of them, they are very rough terrain. So walkers and wheelchairs are not something that we can really be using on the trails.
Got it. Do you know how the origin of the name Bugaboo?
Bugaboo, yes, it was, they were mining, is when miners first came and they were exploring the area and they didn't really find anything. So Bugaboo was well, nothing there. That's the name that they had used for it. So it had to do with the mining history and there being a complete lack of stuff to mine around there.
Got it. I think we have time for one more. Do you have an opinion about the best timing for seeing wildflowers?
No. So all throughout June, July, August, there is different wildflowers, and especially because we're on those different ecoregions, montane, subalpine, alpine, flowers bloom at different times, but I hike all summer long and different wildflowers are in bloom at different times. So it's usually, I always come across wildflowers Yeah, I didn't really talk about that much throughout the presentation now, but wildflower season is quite spectacular. So we have a whole bunch of different wildflowers that bloom at different times, and yeah, again, the different elevations will have different flowers. So all of them will offer opportunities for wildflowers.
Excellent. Well, I just want to apologize to our guests that we didn't have time to get through all the questions, but please do reach out to your adventure specialist or our concierge team. They have the answers to 99% of the questions that you did ask today. So there are answers out there. Please just give us a call. And I also want to let everyone know that all of our webinars are recorded and you can watch them replayed on our website. So you will all get a reminder email with the link to this particular broadcast, and you can watch it slowly and take notes and you know, learn things that you forgot or missed the first time. Please do use that as a resource. But in general, you can always watch the replay about 24 hours after the live broadcast. So just know that that's a resource there for you in case there was too much information to really take it all in today. Lianne, I just want to turn it back to you in case you have any closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I hope that you learned more about the mountains and that you got amped. Like I said, I am the most excited I could possibly be for this itinerary to finally get off the ground, and it's going to be incredible, and yeah, it's going to be amazing. I can't wait for them to finally happen, and I hope to see you all there. It's going to be a wicked trip, so please do come and join.
Excellent. Thank you again, Lianne, and thanks to everyone who tuned in today. Please join us next week for the next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Hope everybody has a wonderful weekend.